Welcome to EKU Then and Now. I'm EKU President Doug Whitlock, and our guest today is Judge James Chenault, one of Eastern's most distinguished graduates and one of Richmond, Kentucky's leading citizens. He received his A.B. degree from Eastern in 1949 and then his law degree from the University of Kentucky, which in 2000 named him to the UK Law Hall of Fame. He served as a circuit judge in Kentucky for some 4 decades, and for many years was the president of the Kentucky Association of Circuit Judges. He was a member of the task force that did a preliminary study of the need for a new judicial article for the Kentucky Constitution, and was the keynote speaker at the Kentucky Citizens Conference for Judicial Improvement in 1973 that launched the public campaign for judicial reform, a campaign that led to the voters' approval of a new Kentucky judicial system which many have called the finest state court system in America. Judge Chenault was named a member of EKU's Hall of Distinguished Alumni in 1974, and in 1982 was named Outstanding Alumnus. Judge Chenault, thank you for joining us on EKU Then and Now. And before we get into some of the questions I have, as we were going through that introduction, it occurred to me that there were a couple things about your long and illustrious career on the bench that ought to mention. You served, as I recall, for many years on the faculty of a college, if you will, for judges in Nevada. And then also, if I recall, didn't you sort of pioneer in Kentucky the utilization of video cameras in your courtroom?
Yes, I started that, not in Kentucky, it's in the United States. We started with the first successful use of video as the official court record in the United States, and it's now been accepted. Kentucky has it widespread, and it's in many other places in the United States.
Well, when of course, as you and I were talking before we got started, there are a number of people, several here in Richmond, that like to brag that they went to school at Eastern for 16 years generally, and you're one of those folks. So, outside of your law education at the University of Kentucky, you spent a lot of years being educated on this campus.
Absolutely. I started in first grade in February 1929. At that time, the grades were divided in 1A and 1B. And I started in 1B in February, and then, of course, in September, I was in 1A. In February, I went to the second grade, 1B, and so on. And they quit that in the 6th grade. They made us all go to summer school, and we didn't have a 6A. We went on into junior high, or the 7th grade. And I finished high school in 1940 and enrolled in Eastern in September 1940. And my recollection was that we were in the largest freshman class it ever had, which was 400. And it's the first time that it took the enrollment over 1,000 here in Eastern. And I was here then up till in 1943. I had a hiatus in my formal education when I went in the Navy. And I was gone there over 3 years. And I came back, I transferred or used my credits to get into law school at the University of Kentucky. And when I finished that, that was on a quarter system, and we went around the time. And for some fool reason, I thought it was urgent that I do that and get through, that I'd lost so much time. In reflection, I've often wondered what my hurry was. But I was out of law school again in February of '49, and I came back to Eastern and took some classes, and I transferred enough that made me where I could graduate here in 1949.
Well, we're very proud that you did.
Yeah, and it's an interesting thing. My Eastern diploma is dated June the 1st, 1949, and my UK Law School diploma is dated June the 3rd, 1949. I always told people I was a child prodigy.
Yeah. Went from baccalaureate degree to a law degree in just a couple days.
Yeah, a couple days.
Well, I expect, law's kind of the family profession for the Chenault. So,
Yeah.
we've never talked about this, but I would imagine that when you started your college work, the law degree was your objective from the beginning.
Oh yeah. By the time I was in high school, I'd certain I was going to be a lawyer. Wasn't ever any question in my mind about that. My father was a lawyer, and my grandfather was a lawyer.
You talked about starting then in 1940. Of course, 40 was kind of a milestone year for Eastern. That was one of our 2 undefeated football teams.
Yeah.
That football team in 1940. And then Herman Lee Donovan left Eastern to become president of the University of Kentucky in 1940. And William Francis O'Donnell became the 5th president of Eastern. Of course, had served for almost 20 years.
Well, another little event you didn't mention, Germany invaded Poland on September the 1st of 1940.
Yeah.
So that changed the world.
Yes, it did. Yes, it did. And I've heard other Eastern students from that era talk about being, I believe it was in L.G. Kinnemer's class, and listening to Hitler on the radio. And Kinnemer made some pretty dire predictions that turned out to be true. Now, I've got something for you this morning, and now we've got something called the Family Educational Privacy Act, FERPA, that would prevent someone from sharing academic information improperly with anybody other than the student. But in 1942, there was no such thing as the FERPA Act. So about 3 weeks ago maybe, a workman came down to see me. We've been putting a new fire alarm system in the Coates building, and in some storage space, some mechanical space up under the seats in the balcony of Brock Auditorium, they found a box of old blue books, examination books. And I have here in my hand the examination book for History 202, completed by one James Chenault on the 30th day of January in 1942. And it's a pretty good grade. It's a B+. And you probably don't remember completing that particular blue book.
I don't quite remember it.
But I thought you would enjoy having that.
Yeah, what about that? Just glancing quickly, how in the world did they cut it down from an A+?
I'm just not sure. I'm fairly confident that any attempt to appeal that grade would be unsuccessful.
It's bound to have been some prejudice the professor had against
at this point.
You mentioned the auditorium in Brock. When we were in training school, they would take us, and I think maybe some even when we got into high school, we would go over to have programs, hear certain programs in the chapel. Chapel was mandatory in the school then, and we sat in the upper balcony. And I remember watching the professors walk down, taking the roll by what seats were empty there, and they had some excellent programs then in the chapel. I reckon it got where they didn't have enough seats to do that they had to quit it for that reason, but it was a great program they had.
Oh, when I was a freshman here in 1961, 62, I think my freshman class was the last class that would fit in Brock. So that year we had the mandatory assembly programs, and my assigned seat, where I had to be county president, was up in the balcony in the second row, right up against one of the vomitories, one of the exits.
Yeah.
So I never forget. And we had, Jimmy, we had some great speakers.
That really they did.
And performers. John Jacob Niles, Norman Vincent Peale, Tom Clark. We had a lot of wonderful presentations.
It exposed the students to a new level of education, you might see, hearing those people that otherwise they wouldn't have any chance. And at that time, of course, we had no TV, and they didn't have that much on radio of that kind. So the speakers were invaluable to get them, and as you said, got top flight people to come.
What are some of the big changes you've seen in the life of this university?
Well, first off, how could you be a Richmond resident and not have some kind of affinity for Eastern? I think in the sports programs, I know people, I'm a graduate of UK, I'm for the UK teams, but I don't have to be for them at the expense of Eastern. Eastern is our home team, and I never miss a sporting event because it, in my opinion, is my team. Well, I don't understand that a lot of people don't have that attitude. But along the way, of course, there have been massive changes. I remember when the building program, they built while I was in high school, built the 3 dormitories where Old Memorial had been. And then they built the Fitzpatrick building. And they tore down, they used to be 3 houses there. One of them was Mr. Alt, the superintendent of grounds. One of them was Dr. Ferris, that had one, I've forgotten who's in the third one, but lived right there on campus in those houses. And then they tore them down. But they had a big change. They took the football, it was beside Burnham Hall, south of it, and they had bleachers there first, and then they built Hanger Stadium. The Weaver Health Building was there because they'd had a great big building burned, and where they played basketball, so they built Weaver Health Building. And all through 7th grade to 12, we went over for physical education 2 or 3 times a week. They had swimming and they had all sorts of other things there. And one of the big changes I mentioned in sports, Dr. Donovan, as I always was told, went to the legislature to get money, and someone remarked to him that you all don't even have a football team or something. And he thought, well, if that's what it takes to get something, we'll get one. And he hired Rome Rankin, who was out of Ironton, Ohio, a high school coach. And he came down here and brought 3 of his high school players, Monk Eberlin and Johnny Killen and another one. And I've since learned that Charles Hayes showed me the letter he found in archives where they hired Rankin, and it was in there that he had to win. If he didn't, they wasn't going to keep him.